He only gave her his warm cloak so she wouldn't die in the snow. But by the next morning, her tribe said he was now her husband, and if he refused, he would be killed. What began as a simple act of kindness would trap him in a world of ancient trials, impossible choices, and a love he never asked for, but could no longer walk away from. The wind cut through the pines like a whisper filled with warning. Eli Whitaker leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes squinting into the sharp white flurries that blew down from the ridge. Snow had started earlier than the old almanac predicted, and that meant trouble. Eli was used to silence. He worked alone, lived alone, and trusted no one since the war had taken too many friends. His only company now was his gray gelding, Smoke, and the fire cloak sewn by his mother before she passed. It was thick, hand-stitched wool, black with a red sunburst pattern, and warmer than anything store-bought. He kept it rolled tight behind his saddle, used only in the worst weather. The storm was turning serious. He nudged Smoke toward the narrow pass, hoping to make it through before dusk. That was when he saw it. A dark shape curled near the base of a tree, half covered by snow. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a deer that had frozen in place. But something about the shape made him stop. He slid off his horse and moved closer. It was a person, a girl. Her skin was dark with windburn, and she wore a thin leather dress that offered little protection. Her black hair was stiff with ice, and her lips were pale blue. She did not move. Eli dropped to one knee. "Hey," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, dark, alert, and full of something he could not name. Fear? No. Resignation, like she had already accepted death. She was young, maybe 19, maybe younger, and she was dying. Eli looked around. There was no sign of anyone else. No footprints. No shelter. Just the endless white of the mountain. He hesitated. He had heard stories. The mountain tribes did not trust outsiders. Some said they punished kindness like it was an insult. Some said their laws were older than time and dangerous to break. But none of that mattered now. Eli unstrapped the fire cloak from his saddle. His mother's stitches still held strong. The fabric smelled of smoke and pine and memories. He wrapped it carefully around the girl. Her body trembled against his hands, but she did not speak. She only looked at him with wide eyes. Then, slowly, she reached up with shaking fingers and pulled the cloak tighter around herself. "You stay warm," Eli said, unsure if she understood. He built a small fire using kindling from his pack. The flames grew slow and steady, licking at the cold. The girl watched in silence, her face softening as heat returned to her skin. After a long while, she pointed to herself. "Leota," she whispered. Eli gave a small nod. "Eli." They sat like that in silence, two strangers with nothing but snow and fire between them. He did not know it yet, but that simple act, sharing his warmth, would change both of their lives forever. The first light of morning crept over the trees, turning the snow a soft blue. Eli stirred near the dying fire, brushing frost from his shoulders. The storm had passed, but the air was still bitter. He reached for his hat, dusted it off, and stood up with a quiet groan. Leota was already awake. She sat across from him, wrapped tightly in the fire cloak. Her cheeks had color again, and her eyes no longer looked like they belonged to someone standing at death's door. She watched Eli with a gaze both calm and intense. He tipped his hat. "Morning." She rose slowly and walked toward him. Without a word, she held out the fire cloak, carefully folded in her arms. Eli blinked, surprised. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You keep it." Leota pushed it toward him again, her face suddenly full of concern. She spoke quickly in her own language, her voice rising and falling with emotion. Her hands moved as if trying to explain something bigger than the words could carry. "I don't understand," Eli said softly. She paused, then pointed at the cloak, then at herself. Her tone shifted, less urgent now, more serious. She pointed at Eli, then back to the cloak. Her expression was no longer just thankful. It was something heavier, something final. "I gave it to you," he said gently. "It was a gift. You needed it." Leota stared at him. Her lips parted, but she said nothing more. Slowly, she lowered the cloak and hugged it to her chest. Her eyes never left his face. Eli turned away, feeling the weight of that gaze on his back. He packed up his things, careful to leave behind some dried meat and half a canteen of water near the fire pit. "Take care of yourself, Leota," he said, mounting his horse. "Hope you make it home safe." As he rode away, she remained standing, her figure growing smaller behind the trees. He glanced back once and saw her holding the fire cloak like it was something holy. Eli rode for hours, the snow crunching beneath Smoke's hooves. The sun was high by the time he reached the edge of the forest. In his mind, he replayed her eyes, her voice, the way she had tried to return the cloak. Maybe it meant something to her people. Maybe she feared trouble. But he had done the right thing. He had helped someone in need. That was all. He told himself that again and again. What he could not know, was that in Leota's tribe, a man who gives his fire cloak to a woman is not just offering warmth. He is offering his word, his protection, his life. And as Leota turned back toward her people, fire cloak still on her shoulders, she knew her world had changed forever. By afternoon, Eli reached the mountain outpost, a weather-beaten cabin with a crooked sign that read Hunter's Rest. Smoke snorted and shook off snow as Eli dismounted, his limbs stiff from the cold. Inside, the scent of firewood and stew wrapped around him like a warm blanket. 3 men sat around a wooden table, playing cards and sipping from metal cups. One of them, a stocky man with gray sideburns and a rifle at his side, looked up as Eli entered. "Well, I'll be," the man said. "Eli Whitaker. Thought you were wintering down south." Eli nodded. "Changed my plans. Roads were too quiet. Thought I'd ride through before the snow got worse." The man poured him a cup of coffee, dark and bitter. "You passed through the northern trails?" Eli took a sip and nodded. "Camped out last night. Storm caught me by surprise." Another man leaned in, eyes narrow. "You see anyone out there?" "Folks say the nomads are moving again." Eli said nothing at first. His fingers curled around the warm tin cup. "I saw signs," he replied, cautious. "Footprints. Smoke maybe. Nothing more." The men exchanged glances. The one with the rifle frowned. "They've been spotted near the river pass." Whole group. Quiet. Watching. Eli's stomach tightened. He thought of Leota, her quiet voice, her sharp eyes. He wondered if she had made it home. He had told himself she would be safe. But now he was not so sure. That night, Eli stayed in the loft above the outpost. The bed was lumpy, the walls thin, but the fire below kept the room warm. Still, he could not sleep. Sometime after midnight, a sound drifted through the trees. Drums. Soft at first, like distant thunder. Then clearer. Slow, steady, rising and falling in rhythm like a heartbeat. Eli sat up, his body tense. He moved to the window and looked out. Nothing but darkness and the white glow of snow. But the drums continued, echoing from all sides of the forest. He felt it then, the stillness. The kind that comes before something begins. The next morning, the world was too quiet. Even the birds were gone. Eli stepped outside, the cold biting his face. Smoke stood ready, uneasy, his ears flicking toward the trees. Then they appeared. Figures moved between the trunks, silent, tall, wrapped in furs and paint. 7 of them. Men on foot, faces unreadable. No weapons drawn, no threat in their hands. But their presence was heavy, full of meaning. At the center stood an elder, tall, with silver hair and eyes like stone. Leota walked beside him. She wore the fire cloak across her shoulders. Eli's heart dropped. The elder stepped forward and spoke in a language Eli did not understand. Leota translated softly. He says, "You have claimed me as your wife." Eli blinked. "What?" Leota's voice trembled, but she stood firm. "You gave me the fire cloak. In our ways, that means you promised to protect me, to share your life. You did not just save me, Eli. You married me." Eli stood frozen. The words echoed in his ears. "You have claimed me as your wife." "No," he said quickly, his voice tight. "I was only trying to help." She was freezing. "I did what any decent man would do." Leota turned to her grandfather and spoke in their language, her voice calm but urgent. The elder listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he replied in a low voice, and she nodded slowly. He says, she translated, "It does not matter what you meant. In our tradition, actions speak louder than words. The fire cloak is not just cloth. It is a vow." Eli shook his head. "That's not fair. Where I come from, a blanket is just a blanket." Leota looked at him with something close to sadness. "But here it is a bond. You gave it freely, knowing its value. You shared warmth in the middle of storm. In our ways, that means you are willing to protect me, always." The elder stepped closer. His eyes held no anger, only weight. He spoke again, and this time his tone was sharper. Leota's voice dropped. He says, "If you take back the gift, it is the same as saying I am worth nothing, that you used me. And if that is true, you dishonor my name and our family." Eli's heart pounded. Around them, the other men remained silent, but their stares had hardened. Not hateful, not yet, but something ancient was stirring beneath the surface. "I did not mean to cause harm," Eli said, his voice lower now. "I swear it." Leota looked down for a moment, then met his eyes. "There are only two choices now. Accept the bond, or walk away and bring shame to us all." Eli stepped back. "And what happens if I walk?" Leota hesitated. Her grandfather answered before she could. She listened, and this time her face went pale. "If you leave," she whispered, "they will believe you acted with dishonor. And dishonor must be answered with blood." Silence wrapped around them like fog. Eli's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Leota, standing still in the snow, wrapped in the cloak his mother had made. A piece of his past, now tied to something far bigger than he had ever understood. He was not a cruel man, but this was something he had never faced. He looked at her, really looked. She was strong, brave, not asking for anything, just waiting for truth. "I cannot make that choice here," he said quietly. "Not like this." Leota turned to her grandfather and spoke again. The elder nodded. "He will give you one chance," she said softly. "Come to our village. Learn what the promise means, and then decide. But know this, if you come, you must come with respect." Eli looked at the men surrounding him, then at Leota. "I will come." Eli rode in silence, his hands resting on the saddle horn, his eyes fixed ahead. Beside him, Leota walked quietly, her steps steady despite the cold. The fire cloak still rested on her shoulders like it belonged there. The forest thinned as they entered a wide valley. Red cliffs rose in the distance, their edges dusted with snow. A thin river cut through the middle, winding past tall pines and scattered stones. Smoke drifted from hidden fires. Somewhere ahead, people were watching. Eli felt it. Not fear exactly, but pressure, like stepping into a room where he was not welcome. As they neared the village, faces began to appear, in doorways, behind trees, between rocks. Children watched him with wide eyes. Elders frowned without speaking. Women whispered behind their hands. No one smiled. Leota kept walking. Eli dismounted and led his horse on foot. It felt like the right thing to do. They passed a circle of huts made from bark and hides. In the center of the village, a large fire burned low. Around it, several men stood waiting. Among them was the elder, Leota's grandfather. But one face stood out. A young man, tall and sharp-eyed, stepped forward. His arms were crossed. His face was hard. Leota whispered, "That is Mako, my cousin." Mako looked Eli up and down like a man inspecting a broken tool. He said something in their language. The words came fast and hot. Leota frowned. "He says you do not belong here, that you brought danger." Eli met Mako's stare, but said nothing. The elder raised a hand, calling for calm. He spoke slowly, with firm authority, then turned to Leota. He says, she translated, "You will be given one chance to prove yourself. There will be trials. 3 of them. 1 for strength, 1 for wisdom, and 1 for sacrifice." Eli's chest tightened. "And if I fail?" Leota's voice dropped. "Then the bond is broken with shame, and Mako may take justice into his own hands." Eli nodded. He had figured as much. Mako stepped closer, now speaking in rough English. "You think a gift makes you a man? You gave her a promise, but you're a stranger. A mistake." Leota stood between them. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were bright with emotion. "Enough." The elder spoke again, and the crowd began to scatter. But the tension remained like smoke in the air. Eli looked around. The valley was beautiful, wild, full of life. But right now it felt like a cage. He was no longer a cowboy riding through snow. He was a man walking the edge of a blade. That night, as he sat near a new fire with Leota on the far side, Eli understood the truth. This was not about a blanket anymore. It was about honor and survival, and the trials had only just begun. At sunrise, the village gathered around the central fire. The sky above the cliffs glowed gold, but the wind was sharp and the air carried weight. No one spoke loudly. Even the children stood still. Eli stood with Leota and her grandfather, facing the wide stone wall behind the village. It rose high, smooth in some places, jagged in others. Far above, a dark patch marked the nest of a hawk. "This is the trial of strength," Leota said softly. "You must climb to the nest. Take one feather. Bring it back." Eli stared at the rock face. It looked almost vertical. "No rope." She shook her head. "Only your hands, your body, your will." Mako stood nearby, arms crossed, watching with a smirk. Leota added, "Our warriors have climbed it before. Some failed. Some were hurt. One did not come back." Eli swallowed hard. His boots shifted in the snow, but he nodded. He took off his coat and hat, leaving them by the fire. The wind bit through his shirt, but he welcomed the cold. It made him sharp. At the base of the cliff, the rock was dry but cracked. He found the first handhold and began to climb. The first few feet were easy. His muscles remembered ranch work, lifting hay, hauling fence posts. But this was different. Every grip had to be sure. Every step had a hold. 10 feet up, the wind caught him. 20 feet, and his arms burned. 30, and the stones scraped blood from his fingers. He dared not look down. Once his foot slipped. A gasp rose from the crowd below. He clung to the wall, chest heaving, legs shaking. He thought of letting go. Then he saw her, Leota, standing below with her arms folded tight, eyes locked on him. No smile, no fear, just quiet strength. He kept climbing. The nest came into view, twigs and feathers clinging to a narrow ledge. As he reached out, a sudden cry pierced the air. A hawk. It burst from the nest, wings wide, circling him with sharp cries. Its claws scratched his shoulder as it passed, but he held firm. Blood ran down his arm. He reached into the nest and found one feather, long, strong, dark as night. He clutched it and began the slow, shaking descent. The world spun. His hands bled. His legs burned. But he reached the ground and collapsed. The villagers rushed forward, but none spoke. He opened his fist and held out the feather. The elder took it, examined it, then gave a single nod. Mako stared, his smirk gone. Leota stepped forward. Her face was still calm, but her eyes held something new. Pride. "You did it," she said quietly. Eli smiled through the pain. One down. Leota nodded once. Two to go. That evening, the villagers gathered again around the central fire. The wind had died down, but the cold had deepened. Sparks rose into the night, air like stars trying to return to the sky. Eli sat across from the elder, his hands still bandaged from the climb. His body ached, but his mind was alert. Leota stepped forward and knelt beside a flat wooden box wrapped in cloth. She opened it carefully, revealing several carved stones. Each stone was smooth, oval, and marked with strange symbols. Animals, trees, stars, rivers, suns. "This is the trial of understanding," she said, her voice steady. "These stones tell a story. You must find the meaning before the fire burns to embers." Eli leaned forward. "What happens if I guess wrong?" Leota looked down. "Then the story is broken, and so is the trust." The elder nodded to her. She placed the stones on the ground in a wide circle, each one facing Eli. He studied them in silence. A bear, an eagle, a coiled snake, a figure with open arms, a rising sun, a tree with no leaves. He could not read their language. That much was clear, but maybe it was not about language. Maybe it was about truth. Eli looked at the sky. The fire popped beside him, burning steady for now. He closed his eyes and thought. Back on the ranch, the seasons told stories without words. Spring brought life. Summer brought strength. Fall was for letting go. Winter was for surviving. He opened his eyes. He looked again at the stones. The eagle could be spring, hope, and flight. The bear, strong and heavy, summer. The snake, slipping out of its skin, autumn. The bare tree, winter. But in the center, that figure with open arms, it had no season. It had a purpose. He picked up the center stone and held it in both hands. "This," he said softly, "is the one who gives." Leota raised her eyes. He placed the figure in the middle of the circle. "The eagle is spring," he said aloud. "New beginnings. The bear is summer, strength and harvest. The snake is fall, letting go. The tree is winter, endurance." He placed each stone around the figure in order. Together, they're the cycle. But the one in the center chooses how to live through it. The fire had burned low. The orange glow flickered across the faces of the villagers. Mako stood with his arms crossed, but he said nothing. Eli looked at the elder. The old man stared at the stones, then at Eli. After a long pause, he gave a slow nod. Leota translated. He says, "You did not know our symbols, but you understood the meaning. And that is enough." The circle was silent. Even Mako looked unsure. Eli let out a long breath. 2 trials done, 1 left. And this next one would test more than his body or mind. It would test his heart. The fire had been rebuilt larger now, tall and bright, casting long shadows across the village. No one spoke. Even the children sat still, eyes wide, breath held. Something sacred was about to begin. Eli stood beside Leota and her grandfather. His hands were still sore, his mind still tired, but his heart beat loud in his chest. The elder stepped forward, holding a small leather pouch in both hands. The pouch made a soft clinking sound, like bone against bone. Leota spoke quietly. "This is the final trial, the trial of the heart. It is not about strength, not about understanding. It is about truth." The elder knelt before the fire and spilled the contents of the pouch onto a soft hide. Small carved bones rolled and came to rest in a strange pattern. He studied them for a long time. His face was calm, but Eli saw the weight in his eyes. At last, the elder rose and pointed, not at the fire, not at the sky, but at Eli's chest. Leota stepped closer. "He says the bones have spoken. You must give up the thing you hold most dear." Eli frowned, confused. Leota's voice softened. "He means something from your life before this. Something that ties you to the man you were." Eli looked down at himself. His gun belt hung at his side. His horse stood tied beneath a tree. His knife rested on his boot. All things he had used and trusted for years. But then he reached into his inner pocket and felt the worn edges of a folded photograph. He pulled it out. A faded image. His younger sister, Sarah, smiling in the sun, her arms around a dog with floppy ears. She had died young. That photo was the only piece of her he had left. Eli stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. "She was the best part of my past," he said softly. "But maybe I've been holding on too tightly." Leota's eyes filled with emotion. Eli walked toward the fire. He knelt beside it and placed the photo on the ground. The flames licked toward it gently, waiting. "She would want me to become the kind of man who chooses life," he said. "And maybe love." He picked up the photo, kissed it once, and laid it into the fire. The edges curled. The image blackened. Her smile disappeared into smoke. A hush fell over the village. Even Mako looked stunned. The elder stepped forward and said something in a low voice. Leota translated, tears on her cheeks. "He says you have passed. Not because you let go of something, but because you knew what it meant to keep holding on." Eli looked into the fire, the loss settling deep in his chest. But then Leota touched his arm, soft, sure. And for the first time since that long winter began, Eli felt something warm begin to grow inside him again. The next morning, the village looked different, not in shape or sound, but in feeling. The cold was still sharp. The cliffs still towered. Smoke still rose from cooking fires. But now, when Eli walked through the camp, eyes met his without anger. A few even nodded. He had not expected peace. He had not expected welcome. But something had shifted. At midday, the elder called the people together. The circle by the fire filled once again. This time, It was not for trial or judgment. It was for something else. Leota stood by Eli's side. Her eyes were calm, her hands folded in front of her. Then an older woman stepped forward, tall, proud, silver hair braided tight with beads of green and bone. Her face was lined with time, her eyes sharp. Leota leaned in and whispered, "My grandmother, Imala." Eli remembered her from before. The cold look, the hard words, the way she had warned them all that he would bring trouble. But now Imala carried something in her hands. A folded robe, soft leather, colored in rich browns and reds, decorated with tiny shells and thread that shimmered in the light. She stepped forward and held out to Eli. No words, just silence and offering. Eli hesitated, unsure. Leota nodded. "It is a sign. She accepts you." Eli took the robe with both hands and bowed his head. He did not know their words, but he knew respect when he saw it. From the edge of the crowd, Mako stepped forward. The wind tugged at his hair. His face was still guarded, but something had changed. He looked Eli in the eyes and gave a small nod. Not friendship, not yet, but something close to respect. The elder spoke a few final words, and the people began to drift away. Later that evening, Eli sat alone by the fire near the stream, the new robe wrapped around his shoulders. He ran his fingers over the stitching, wondering how many hands had shaped it. Leota appeared beside him, silent as always. She sat down close enough to share the warmth. The fire crackled, and behind them, the village settled into sleep. They said nothing for a long time. Then Leota spoke, barely a whisper. "Do you regret it?" Eli looked into the flames. His mind went back to the cold night he found her, to the photo in the fire, to the climb, the puzzles, the pain. And then to now, this quiet moment, this warmth not just on his skin, but in his chest. "No," he said, "not even for a second." Leota leaned her head against his shoulder. The fire crackled softly. The stars blinked above like old eyes watching something new. Wrapped in the robe and her silence, Eli felt something he had not felt in years. Belonging. The snow had begun to melt. Not much, just thin patches where the sun touched the earth for a little longer. But the change was there. The wind had softened. The air held the faint smell of pine needles instead of ice. Eli walked through the village with steady steps. Children ran past him, laughing. A woman waved from a fire pit, where thin strips of meat dried on wood racks. A man nodded from a stream as he filled his water skin. No one looked away. No one stared like he was a threat. They saw him now, not as an outsider, not as a mistake, but as a man who had chosen to stay. He passed the sacred cliff where he had climbed for the feather. Past the circle where the stones had tested his understanding. Past the fire where he had burned the only photo he had left of his old life. Each place had taken something from him. Each place had given something back. He reached the edge of the village and found Leota waiting beneath the tree where smoke was tied. Her eyes met his, calm and full of quiet fire. She smiled. "Today," she said, "my grandmother wants to teach you to speak our words." Eli grinned. About time. He reached out and took her hand. It fit easily into his, small, strong, warm. They stood together, facing the valley. Far beyond the trees, his old world waited. But it no longer pulled at him. He had found something different here. Not ease, not comfort, but meaning. "I used to think love was simple," he said softly, "like a feeling that just appeared one day. But it's not." Leota turned to him, listening. "It's a choice," he continued. "A quiet promise you make every day. To protect, to stay, to listen, even when it's hard." She nodded, then leaned her head gently against his shoulder. Above them, the stars blinked awake, one by one. Eli looked up at them, cold, distant, endless, and yet, somehow, they felt closer than ever before. He had lost much in his life, but here, in this valley, wrapped in silence and warmth, he had found something he never expected. A future, maybe not the one he planned, but the one he was meant for. He looked down at Leota, her hair brushing his cheek in the breeze. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. She smiled without looking up. "I know." And under the stars, wrapped in the promise of fire and snow, Eli Whitaker began the life he never thought he deserved. One shaped not by what he ran from, but by who he chose to become. If this quiet story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. What does sacrifice mean to you? And if you believe love can grow from the most unexpected places, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.